Caution, this episode may not be suitable for young listeners.
I remember being in first or second grade and McGruff the drug dog coming to school and going home and being like, hey, the dog at school said that stuff that you're smoking isn't cigarette, that's drugs. And my mom just telling me we don't talk about our family secrets.
Oh.
You know, I was just like, okay, well, I guess we just don't tell anybody that there's drugs in the house. And sometime in the morning, I was awakened. I was being suffocated. So someone had broken into our home and was physically attacking me. He tells me, don't scream, don't do anything, and I won't hurt you. I remember thinking he's going to rob me, he's going to kill me. So he was a serial rapist. But I remember all through that praying to God to save me, to spare my life. My biggest prayer was just don't let this man kill me. Time was just standing still. I was not hysterical. I wasn't crying. I think just in shock, just, okay, this really just happened.
Have you ever had a traumatic event in your life? And I'm not talking about being stood up for a date. I'm talking about a real traumatic event. I'm talking about something that has changed the course of your life forever. Sometimes a smell, a noise, or a word can trigger your mind and you are right back in the middle of that traumatic event. Maybe this traumatic event was something physical, something emotional, or maybe even something sexual. Maybe like our guest today, it's all three things tied up in one horrible event. How does a person get through something as traumatic as rape? This is such a violation and such a life-altering event. Maybe God has saved you from death, but can He also bring healing and purpose to your life? These are hard questions that I want to discuss with our guest today as she tells us her life change story. My name is Eric Hutchinson, and this is the If Nothing Changes podcast. My guest today is zooming in all the way from Florida. So, hey, new friend, why don't you introduce yourself to our listeners?
My name is Rebecka. I'm a grateful believer in Jesus. I struggle with anger, resentment, and need to control my life.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about where you're from? So where were you born? Where did you grow up? Tell us a little bit about your background.
Sure. I was born in Fort Worth, Texas. Grew up in Oklahoma, so I come from the Midwest. I am a only child by my mom. I have siblings from my biological father's side. So I grew up all over Oklahoma and Texas. Been in Florida for about 15 years now.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this. So you kind of mentioned that you're an only child with your mom. So tell me a little bit about that. I mean, what were your earliest memories? So was your dad not around during that time? Or tell me a little bit about your childhood.
So my mom and my biological father were never married. My dad had 3 other children and a wife. And then I was born, and then he was in the process of divorcing his wife. I was born, and then my mom didn't work out, and so he moved on. So we think that we have 13 siblings by my father. I only know there's only 6 that we can account for, and I am smack in the middle. So there are 3 older than me and 2 younger than me. And we only have 1 brother. So we're all girls. I've done a DNA test, but I haven't had any matches yet. And when we would ask our dad, he would say, I have 13. We don't know if that's true, fabricated, because he thought it made him sound macho. We don't know. So I've only ever met the 3 that are older than me and the 2 that are younger than me.
So you don't really have any early memories of your father being in your household, right? I mean, it was just you and your mom. Is that correct?
Me and my mom, my grandparents. I did have a stepfather that came into my life when I was around 2 or 3. He was abusive to my mom and me, physically and emotionally. I have very few memories of him. She met my stepdad who raised me as his own when I was about 4. Um, and so that's really kind of where my home life, like my childhood memories and stuff, are all kind of grounded in that. I have very, very few of before that time. Um, my stepdad raised me as his own. Um, they and him and my mother were married, divorced, and remarried. So it was kind of an on and off thing. My dad who raised me passed away when I was 17. So, and then me and my biological dad, we never really had a close relationship. He was in and out of my life.
So how was the family household? How was things? Was it a happy time? I mean, do you recognize any dysfunctions now that you maybe didn't then? I mean, what was it like growing up with your mom and stepdad? So you said your memories kind of started around 4 and 5 years old. So
Very, very full of dysfunction. My mom's family, and my whole life growing up, I didn't know at the time. I thought it was normal. These behaviors are normal. All families act like this. I remember being in first or second grade and McGruff the drug dog coming to school and going home and being like, "Hey, the dog at school said that stuff that you're smoking isn't cigarette, that's drugs." And my mom just telling me we don't talk about our family secrets,
ah.
you know? And so I was just like, okay, well, I guess we just don't tell anybody that there's drugs in the house, So it was just, it was what it was. I didn't realize that it was wrong at the time, or that it was a problem.
So was there any faith or religion as you were growing up? I mean, did you hear about God at all? What was your belief about God as a child?
So I always knew that Jesus loved me. Like, we always talked about Jesus in church. We were not faithful attenders of church. Um, Looking over my life, I would say that we were CEO Christians, Christmas and Easter only.
So as you went into junior high and high school, that's where a lot of people say, hey, that's where I started experimenting with substances and where I started kind of rebelling a little bit. I mean, as you got into the junior high and high school years, were you a rule follower or were you a little bit of a rebel? Did you who were you hanging around with at that time?
So I was a little bit of both, if that's a possibility. I never liked to do bad things because I was afraid of disappointing my dad. I was always seeking his love and approval. So I never wanted to do anything that would upset him. However, I mean, I was a teenager, I did things. I smoked in high school, junior high and high school. My parents bought my cigarettes for me. So my drug of choice has always been nicotine. I In my introduction, I told you I have a need to control, so I don't like anything that makes me feel like I'm not in control. So I've just I've dabbled in drugs, but I was never a drug user.
So, as you were a senior in high school and you started thinking about what happens after high school, did you have aspirations of going to college? Did you go to college or did you go into the workforce? What happened immediately after high school?
My senior year of high school was a very uneasy year. My grandmother passed away in November of '96. Immediately followed by the man who had raised me my whole life in April of '97. And then I graduated high school in May of '97. So I came out of high school just all, God has taken everybody I've ever loved away from me. I'm here to figure out how to navigate adulthood on my own. And so I was very angry and bitter at God coming out of high school. Just a lot of hurt, a lot of, if this is what God does, do I even want a relationship with him?
So I know that not too long after high school that you had a major event happen to you. Were you living at home with your mom at that time, or were you living by yourself?
No, actually, my husband and I had been dating my husband we started dating in 96. So we'd been dating a little over a year. And my mom was moving back to Texas from Oklahoma, and I was not going because I was an adult now and I have this relationship I've been in. And so, with much disappointment from my in-laws, my husband and I moved in together. We were not married at the time, but I knew I didn't want to go to Texas. I knew I couldn't afford to live on my own. And so that made the most logical sense.
So you were living with your husband. I mean, are you still married to this guy?
Yeah.
So okay, so you're
25
married.
years.
Yeah, so you were living with him. Tell me about this event that happened in your life that kind of changed the course of things for you.
So we, my boyfriend at the time, husband, worked nights. So he was working at a local truck stop. He worked from 2 o'clock to 9 o'clock at night sometimes, but then sometimes he would work the graveyard shift. So the 9 to 6 o'clock in the morning. It kind of depended on my schedule. We only had one car, just a bunch of broke kids from Oklahoma. And so I would work 3 to 9. And so on the days I worked 3 to 9, he would pull the graveyard shift. So he would take me to work and pick me up. And then I would take him to work, and then I would go home, and then I would go back in the mornings and pick him up. So one night it was raining, and I had taken him to work, and I, fun fact, hate thunderstorms, which how I ended up in the Midwest and hating thunderstorms, I'm not sure. But so I talked about staying with him at work because I didn't want to go home alone in the thunderstorm. And we had a little baby kitten. And so I said, well, I need to go home and feed the kitten. And so I'd gone home and fallen asleep watching the weather channel, or well, the local news channel. And sometime in the morning, I was awakened. I was being suffocated. And at first I thought, you know, how when you're groggy and you start coming to, I thought, oh, I forgot to go pick him up from work. He had to have a coworker bring him home, and he's upset with me. And so I started trying to push what I thought was my boyfriend off of me. And I heard a voice, and it wasn't his. And so someone had broken into our home and was physically attacking me. He then proceeded to ask me if I was married. I lied. I was like, yes. He asked me where my husband was. I said he was at work. He asked when he would be home. I said anytime. He should have already been home. The whole time my face is covered. And so he tells me, you know, don't scream, don't do anything, and I won't hurt you. And so he kind of sets me up on the couch, stands me up, and he starts walking me down the hallway of our trailer. And I remember thinking he's going to rob me, he's going to kill me. And then he just he opened the back door and was trying to force me outside. And I said, I don't want to go outside, it's storming. And he was like, go outside or I'm going to kill you. And so he just kind of took me out of my home and was walking me towards the woods. And we had this old car that belonged to my husband's sister that was parked outside. And he forced me into that car. And anytime I would try to move my head or anything, he would say, don't look or I'm going to kill you. And so he forced me into this car. And I was like, this car doesn't run. So now at this point, I think he's taking me hostage and he's going to make me driving somewhere. You know, every movie I've ever seen is like speed fast forwarding through my brain. And so he just opened up the door of the car and just had me lay face down. And that's when he raped me. But I remember all through that praying to God to save me, you know, to spare my life, and not feeling worthy enough or that I had led a life worth saving to God. My my biggest prayer was just don't let this man kill me. Don't let this man kill me and my husband have to come home and find me. I didn't want that for him. And so that was the biggest thing, was just I can still remember praying, God, I know I'm not worthy to ask you to spare my life. But he did.
Wow. So did he, after he finished with you, did he throw you out of the car and you were laid on the ground, or did he knock you out? I mean, who found you, or did you call 911 after all of that? What happened?
So the car didn't run. It was just broken down in our yard. So whenever he was done raping me, he stood me back up. He walked me back to the door of the trailer. He told me if I would fix the lock, my husband would never know that he was there. That he also would get rid of that cat and get in a dog that could guard my house. And that he just wanted a little bit of sex. And that he was going to hang out in the woods to make sure that I didn't call anybody. And that after a little bit, if I hadn't called anybody, he would go ahead and leave. So I remember I walked back into, we just lived in a little trailer. So I walked back into the back door of the trailer and I paced up and down the hallway a couple of times. And you know, those like wooden blocks that have kitchen knives in them. I went and I grabbed two of them. I put one in each hand and I sat down on my couch and I was too scared to try to leave to go get in my car because I was afraid if I run out of the house, he's going to come after me. And so we still had a landline because we didn't have cell phones back then. And so I remember picking up the phone, expecting it not to have a dial tone. And once there was a dial tone, I called my boyfriend at work and he answered the phone. And I'm not sure he could tell immediately that anything was wrong. He's like, "Why are you awake?" And I asked for his coworker, if his coworker was still there. And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "I need you to borrow his car and come home right now." And of course he was like, "Oh, I can't leave in the middle of my shift. What do you mean?" And I just said, "Our house was just broken into. Borrow his car and come home, please." And I think he had already laid the phone down by that point. There was a bell on the door of the place where he worked. And so I heard the bell open. And then the next voice I heard was his coworker. And he was like, "What's wrong?" And so I just told him, I was like, "Our house was just broken into. I need Jay to use your car and come home." And he said, "Baby, he already has my keys. He's already on the way." And he told me, he said, "I'm going to stay on the phone with you until Jay gets there." He said, "If the phone goes dead, I will call 911 from the other phone line." And so that man stayed on the phone with me and just talked to me until my boyfriend got home.
So whenever your boyfriend got home, were you just on the floor hysterical, or were you in shock? I mean,
just in shock. I was just sitting on the couch, still with my knife, phone on my ear, talking to the guy. I remember saying to the guy at one point, "Where is he? He should have been here by now." And it was honestly, it was probably a 15 to 20 minute drive, but I felt like I'd been on the phone for an hour. And the truth is, he probably made that drive in 10 minutes.
Wow.
I heard him turn the corner a half mile from our house just because I heard tires screeching the whole way from the corner into our driveway.
Wow.
And time was just standing still. I was not hysterical. I wasn't crying. I think just in shock, just, okay, this really just happened.
So did your boyfriend immediately, pick up the phone after he found out what happened? Did he pick up the phone and call the police? I mean, when did you get the police involved?
So we got the police involved as as soon as he got home, I told the guy I was talking to on the phone, his coworker, I said, he's here now. And he said, do not open the door until you know it is Jay. Well, as soon as Jay shut the car door, he was screaming my name. So I knew it was him. And so I said, it's him. And so we hung up the phone. He came, I unlocked the door and let him in the house. And he wanted to call 911. He, however, was partaking of marijuana at the time. And so there were drugs in our house. And I was like, there's drugs in the house. And he was like, baby, I don't give a crap. They're going to come here and they're not going to be able to say anything about my drugs because that's not what they're here for.
Right.
And so he called 911. It took an hour and us calling 911 a second time to get the sheriff out to our house. It's something my husband still struggles with to this day. However, we were under tornado watches and warnings all over our county. And so I know they were busy storm watching and storm protecting, but in my husband's mind, that didn't matter. They should have been at our house. And so it took a little bit to get the cops there. But once they came in, they looked around the house to make sure he wasn't still in the house. I was like, I know he's not in the house. He didn't come back in with me. And so the deputy asked me, he said, are you willing to go to the hospital? Well, physically, I was fine. I was not, he didn't hit me. He didn't, like, I had no physical bruises or anything like that. So I couldn't understand why they wanted me to go to the hospital. I was like, I guess I'll go to the hospital. I don't feel like I really need to. Like, I'm not hurting. And that's when the deputy explained to me, he was like, there may be evidence that you're not aware of that going to the hospital will help us get. And so I was like, yeah, absolutely. And so I did ask that we drive ourselves, not that we go. I was like, if I have to go by ambulance, I don't want to go. And so they let us drive ourselves. And so we went to the hospital. The deputy met us at the hospital and they performed a rape kit. And then that took several hours. And then we returned back to our home because the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation was there by that point, and all of the sheriff's office trying to get evidence off of the house, fingerprints, things like that, dusting the car. And that it was an all-day process of just gathering evidence. So the one thing that I never saw a weapon other than I felt like he had a gun pointed at my back, but I never saw it. And he would say, don't look or I'm going to kill you. And so that's the only fuzzy memory. Like, I know there had to be some weapon to make me feel like he was serious.
Yeah. So did you find out later whether or not this guy had stalked you? I mean, had he been watching you for days, or was it just one of those things? He's walking by and saw you through the window and decided to come in. I mean, what do you know any of that or not?
I do, actually. I didn't find out until the trial, but he did. So when he ended up getting arrested, finally, he got arrested for the attack of me and 3 other women. So he was a serial rapist. And during the pre-trial, he admitted to knowing or stalking all of his victims. So he either knew them somehow or he had stalked them. So he had been watching the house. He knew I was home alone at night. Since our schedule was kind of flip-floppy, because on my off days, my husband would work 2 to 9, so he was home at night. But so he knew my routine.
So he had been stalking, and then, yeah.
hmm And all of us women have very similar features, and all of our stories are very, very similar.
Wow. Well, I'm amazed at how much he talked to you. That's what really just
hmm
throws me, and asking you if you were married and asking you all these questions. It's like, it's so premeditated.
Yeah, well, and that was what the investigator said. They said the reason he asked about if I lived alone or if I was married was because I was alone in the house at the time. And they said probably the reason he forced me out of the house is because I told him my husband would be home anytime. They said that that was enough to scare him into he didn't want to be alone in a room with me and somebody come in. So if, at least if we're out of the house, he would see a car pull up
Wow.
and could run off into the woods.
Wow. So let me just ask you this as we're going through all this, and I know there's a lot to unpack,
Yeah.
but so did you have an expectation of this? And I'm assuming that you gave them a description of this guy, and that they did maybe a drawing of him or something, and and did you have an expectation that they were going to find him in a week, month, that this was all going to be over soon?
No. I had no expectations because I actually never saw his face. I could tell you about what his structure build was, his voice, but no physical markers. Um, they were able to get DNA at the hospital. There were samples that they were able to take. Um, I had watched enough criminal investigations to know that we had a horrible backlog of untested and unsolved rape kits. So my only expectation was that I was not going to be another unsolved rape kit. That was my only, if I had to call and call and call and call and call, they weren't just going to put me on a shelf and forget I existed. I went through the trauma of going to the hospital and being put through the evidence collecting exam. They weren't just going to set it somewhere and never test it. And so that was really my only expectation was I'm going to stay on top of these people and they're going to find out who did this to me.
Yeah. So how about your husband? Oh, well, actually, he wasn't your husband at the time, but
We weren't
yeah.
married at the
So
time.
what did this event do to your relationship with him? Did it do anything to your relationship with him? I mean, it sounds like
Mm,
he extremely in love with you, and that he was devastated by this event as well. But how did that mess with your dynamic with him at all, or not?
a little bit. He is also a part of Celebrate Recovery now. And so he says in our couple's testimony, he says he's not even sure that he's dealt with the complex feelings around helping me through that time. Like he kind of withdrew. Like, yes, he was there supportively. He would listen to me. He respected anything he stood beside me. But he says he remembers being angry at God on the way home. On I-35 northbound, when you get out of Oklahoma City, there's a church that has one of those big, huge crosses, and it was all lit up. And he says, I remember cursing God as I passed that cross, rushing home to you. And so um, he has some trauma around it, but as far as he's 100% always been there for me. Um, it probably affected our intimacy for a long time because any physical relationships, my brain would put me back into that trauma. So there was some PTSD there. So um, it just it did, but I think we kind of grew through it. We walked it together. It was happening to both of us, not just one of us. Yes, he wasn't physically raped, but somebody very close to him who he loved dearly was. And so I think it affected him too in more ways than he probably either one of us probably understood.
So, Rebecka, I hate to stop you and I hate to leave our listeners on a cliffhanger, but we are almost out of time. I have so many more questions for you. Did they ever catch this guy? And if so, how long did it take? How has this event impacted your kids today? And most importantly, how has God changed your perspective? Were you ever able to forgive this horrific act? These are all questions that we will discuss on our next episode. So, if someone is listening and they have gone through a similar experience, either it's been rape or abuse or something traumatic in their life, what would your message be to that person?
Just that you're not alone. I mean, I think that's the biggest thing I felt. Even though there were other people that I knew had been raped by this person, I still felt a little bit isolated and that I was the only one. And that's not true. Surround yourself with others who see you, love you, and hear you. My biggest encouragement is even if you haven't gotten earthly justice for hurt and abuse that you've encountered on earth, don't stop hoping in Jesus.
Rebecka, thanks so much for sharing the first part of your story with us. Hey, if you are listening today and you or someone you know has been sexually assaulted, the sexual assault hotline is 1-800-656-4673. That's 1-800-656-4673. Call it now if you need help. If you have had a traumatic event in your life, maybe it was a car wreck, maybe it was physical or emotional abuse as a kid, maybe, like Rebecka, you have been raped or sexually abused. No matter what trauma you have experienced, God has a plan for your life. And in that plan, there is hope and healing. However, the first step in that process is up to you, because if nothing changes, nothing changes. See you next time.
When he was arrested, he lived 1 block north and 1 house over from me. So he literally was 1 block from me that whole time.
Oh my gosh.